welcome to the State Secrets podcast brought to you by the Cipher Brief. I'm Suzanne Kelly.
And I'm Brad Christian.
We're doing something a little different with today's podcast. Not only are Brad and I co-hosting, we're also posting the video from today's talk on the Cipher Brief's YouTube channel. So if you just can't stand not seeing our faces, you can also find us there.
In today's podcast, we're talking with Alec Bierbauer and Colonel Mark Cooter about their new book, Never Mind, We'll Do It Ourselves, the inside story of how a team of renegades broke rules, shattered barriers, and launched a drone warfare revolution. Alec and Mark, welcome to the State Secrets podcast.
Thanks for having us.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Gentlemen, this is a book that isn't like other books I've read about how military programs were developed. You take turns writing the chapters. There's a lot of color, a lot of personality, and that's intertwined with kind of the details of how you both look to use this technology to solve really a critical issue for the US and Afghanistan. Why don't we start with each of you telling us a little about your role in the development of the program? Mark, you want to go first?
Okay, sure. I'll just step back. I'm an Air Force intel officer by trade. I had spent, I don't know, by that time, about 12 years in the Air Force, mainly doing fighter unit intel stuff. And I found myself, someone called me one day and said, "Hey, do you want to get into Predator?" I said, "Sure." And this was in the late 90s. Had a chance to be an assistant ops officer and then operations officer, doing things in Bosnia with Predator on the early stages of it. And then I was supposed to leave that and go to the Pentagon and do a great staff tour. And 3 months into that, I got a call that says, drop everything you're doing and you're going to go do something completely different. Your bosses don't know about it. You can't read them in. Only the first general officer in your chain of command will be in this. Go talk to a civilian who's kind of infamous in the Air Force, Nate Clark, and off to the races you go. And that's how I found myself into this program with Alec.
That's an incredible story. I think we all wish that we had stories like that we could tell from our careers. Alec, how about you?
I was doing joint doctrine, so I was happy to
to move over. How about you, Alec? You came from a whole different sort of part of the community on this project.
I did. And in fact, you know, when I was tagged to participate in this program, I was actually very new to CIA. I'd been detailed to CIA from DIA, and I had been working at the Joint Staff and a Joint J2 J3 fusion effort, really supporting targeting after the East Africa embassy bombings in '98. And recognized that, you know, there was a need for better fusion on how CIA human intelligence was being integrated into the targeting effort by the Pentagon. So, you know, my selection for the effort was really driven by, you know, at that time, counterterrorism center at CIA was relatively small. And there were not a lot of people in there with a military background. So I got tagged by Kofor Black, Rich Blee, and told to go see Charlie Allen, where the rest was laid out that I'm sure we'll get into. But what took me to that point, you know, I started as a counterintelligence special agent in the Army, you know, and I was a warrant officer. And had worked my way through a couple of tours overseas, and spent some time then at Fort Meade. Got reconnected to my old boss from Korea, General Pat Hughes, who was then director at DIA. Found me when I was spending a year on the Hill working for Strom Thurmond on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and asked me if I'd come over to DIA and interview there to work in terrorism issues, and from there then made that jump to the Pentagon and then ultimately to CIA. Once I got at CIA and started working in this, I mean, it was mom apple pie and some new technology, and it was hard to step away from. So I wound up staying, becoming a staff officer and doing the rest of my government service there.
That's great. You know, this is a really interesting subject, I think, you know, and as I look back, I believe probably most people heard about this when they read about it in the news after, you know, the specific sort of incident that occurred in Afghanistan. But you guys were there as the program saw its infancy and its birth. What was that like? Because we know when new things happen inside the government, it's always not easy. It's always not well received. What were some of those early sort of challenges that you guys experienced in resistance to this program, maybe?
I'll jump on that first. The resistance was pretty heavy out of the gate. There was no directive to go do something with Predator or with an unmanned system. It really developed out of a memo that was sent following a meeting with Director Tennant and President Clinton. Sandy Berger, the national security advisor at the time, had one of his deputies, Richard Clark, send the memo to both the Pentagon and to CIA, saying you each have a part to play in doing better against bin Laden and Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. CIA, you've got the authorities, and you've got the human capabilities, and Pentagon, you've got the technology and the big checkbook. See if you guys can put something together, and the requirement was to put U.S. eyes on target within 9 months. And so, I as the action officer for it on the CIA side, spent a fair amount of time with the Pentagon, my counterparts there, and that's where I met Mark, and then our folks on the agency side, and Charlie Allen was really leading it from the CIA side, with support from Cofer Black and others at the Counterterrorism Center. But the inherent challenge was, why can't the CIA do this? Why do we have to go outside to the Pentagon for assistance? And our human wasn't adequate to get actionable intelligence on bin Laden. And that became the requirement. So the barriers became, if we can't put a human American on the ground to put eyes on bin Laden, can we do it technically with an aircraft or with ground sensors? And there was heavy resistance to that. We weren't going to put a manned aircraft over Afghanistan because the combat search and rescue capability wasn't there. It's a landlocked country. It was very difficult to be able to support that in a manned capacity. So there was resistance to anything that involved manned aircraft. So we gravitated towards, what else is out there. And, to me, drones weren't supposed to be the answer. But, when we started asking within the developmental community, what else, can we look at? Predator was certainly there. And we were organizationally resistant to it, but and then Mark got pulled in from the Air Force side, and we started building a plan, seeing if it would work. And then I'll save some of the hurdles that came after that for later in the discussion. But yeah, Mark, on the Air Force side, what'd you see?
Well, I think my problems were maybe more complex, but not as big a headaches as Alec had to, because it was mainly focused on how do we deploy. I got in there in June, and we were supposed to be operating no later than September. And so it was a matter of, I knew how to deploy Predator stuff. I had just done that for Allied Force in 1999, but now we were going to do it with a very small team forward and an unproven data link capability somewhere else to fly it from thousands of miles away. We've never done that before. So we had that piece. And plus, in 2000, we were going to take a Predator, and we were supposed to go into another country without them knowing about it and operate over their airspace where they had former Soviet MiG aircraft and surface-to-air missiles. And we were supposed to, in this gangly little airplane, survive that. So half of my focus was on, is that possible, and what do we have to do to make that happen? Working with Alec on the collection that we would be required to do, as well as the technology of getting the airframe over the places that Alec wanted to go.
This is it's such a great story to tell, and it really kind of puts front and center some of the challenges that the UN or the U.S. national security sort of apparatus faces when, it's trying to incorporate technology. And of course, I mentioned that the book is written in what I think is a very believable narrative, though it isn't always politically correct. The drone program, of course, has been highly controversial from its inception. And the Cipher Brief actually published a book review recently from someone who didn't like the way you both referred to sort of skirting some of the tougher issues and some of the terminology that you were using in the book. You talk a little bit about some of the issues, like what to do when terrorists or targets may be hiding in places that harbor women and children. I mean, these are real life issues that you had to think about when you were developing the program. So let me just read really quickly a quote from the book. Terrorists were fond of hiding in places like mosques and hospitals, counting on our own paralytic fear of bad press to stay our hand. That bullshit may carry weight with the political side of the house, but to a military guy, a building is just another stick of bricks when the bad guys use it for refuge, or worse yet, when they shoot at you from inside. So I just kind of like to know, what I love about this is it's real, right? You're not trying to sugarcoat anything. You're not trying to present it in a way that is politically correct. But how do you both respond to criticism that the book isn't addressing those sort of broader ethical issues that were created out of the drone program?
Well, I'll go first on that. To me, the period of time that we cover in the book is 1999 to about 2003, which was when we were both involved with it and really challenged with, how do we take this technology, merge it with our human intelligence, merge it with our signal intelligence, and get that actionable intelligence. The very premise of the book, focuses on the very premise of the memo from Sandy Berger, which was get actionable intelligence, put eyes on target, so that a strike or a capture operation can be put into place. The issue was never with the people of Afghanistan. The issue was with the Taliban giving safe haven, some of the external support that was taking place, and then bin Laden using Afghanistan as a safe haven. Subsequent to this, spending time on the ground in Afghanistan, fantastic people living in real hardship in a lot of cases, really separated from the rest of the first and second world, and the technologies and the news and so forth that we all kind of take for granted. But finding targets, being able to bring people to justice in either a military or a law enforcement capacity, the enemy knows how to manipulate the things that we respect that they don't necessarily respect. They know that we're not going to hit hospitals. They know that we're not going to hit schools. We're not going to hit mosques. They know that we put a different value on women and children than they do. And so they manipulate that against us. The advantage that we have with this platform is that you can be very, very precise. You can limit collateral damage. You can avoid civilian casualties. You can really get it down to the individual level. What we had before this, and what you saw from the response to the embassy bombings in East Africa in '98, is you had cruise missiles, where you put a point target on the ground, and a couple hours later you could deliver a weapon to it. But it was a massive warhead, and you usually had to send 2 or 3 to make sure you got 1 or 2 on target. And the collateral damage that comes from that is much broader. And I think that what we as a government didn't want to do at this point was put more cruise missiles in Afghanistan in an arbitrary sense. We wanted to find one individual, and we wanted to take out the leadership target. So I think the drone program, as we originally conceived of it and put together, was really oriented towards being exacting in that application of military power against a point target. And we've had lengthy discussions amongst ourselves about what do we cover in the book with regards to this and where the program has gone. And from a policy sense, I mean, Mark was a major at the time. I was a 13, 14 at the time. We weren't making policy. We were developing the capabilities so that people could make those hard decisions. What we see now is you've got artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities that are being put on the battlefield that have the potential down the road to be, prosecuting targets with less human involvement. My personal belief is that you've got to have that human in the loop. You've got to have that moral, that ethical dilemma and challenge to be presented with, so that there is accountability and that you can make those hard decisions. In our blunt talk in the book, we were never happy, when we saw targets taking safe haven and mosques. And keep in mind, the second half of the book is covering after we've got ground troops there, and in cases where we're watching troops in contact, U.S. forces on the ground and the enemy taking safe haven in buildings that that are off of our target list. Those are hard situations to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. It's understandable. Mark, would you say that was your experience as well, in sort of thinking through sort of the values component while you were doing this?
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at it, we went through all the normal processes for targeting, where the dialogue that you mentioned, that was the first night. I think we firmly believed in our capability and the precision we had put in. I think we had some challenges on everybody else who was in the higher up in the decision-making loop, didn't have maybe that insight into it. In that one scene, it was not about that building that was determined to be a mosque. It was a target near there. And as the person lining up our operators to do their job, I firmly believe we could mitigate all of that based on the precision that we had and the information that Alec's team had built, plus the precision of the weapon and the abilities of our operators. I mean, later on in the book, we asked them to put the weapon through specific windows, and they were able to accomplish that. So that's the kind, we wanted to keep that dialogue there, but I can assure you, having done this, even later on in my career at higher levels, at no time were we just, if that's a mosque, okay, what are we going to do? How do we mitigate it and do what we need to do? And I say mosque, any other cultural significant piece that was on no strike. Because you also have to remember at the time, CENTCOM was still developing their no strike list and all that kind of stuff. So it was a very fluid situation we were having to deal with.
A lot happening at once.
So kind of a two-part question. Maybe one of you can answer one and flip to the other one. The first one is, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the earliest successes that you may have had in a way that we perhaps might not have perspective on. And the second part is, if you think about drone warfare today and what it's become, you can't even imagine, any sort of a conflict without the presence of drones. Everyone is used to them. At what point did you guys become aware that, or did you become aware that this was going to become that big of an impact in the military? I mean, you started out, it was probably just one or two, and, we're trying to make this work like you're just describing. At what point did you say, wow, this is going to be big?
I'll take the first, if you're good with that, Mark. The successes, we had, in a typical program, you have milestones. We opted for inch stones as we got things started. It was, are we going to be able to, get enough budget to be able to experiment with this? And, there's times where instead of ballistic gel dummies, we're using watermelons for target assessments. But our early successes were, getting the platform through the bureaucracy from DoD and from the Air Force to the CIA, being able to deploy to our launch and recovery location was an inch stone of its own. Crossing the border, on our first flight was monumental. That was, to be able to control it from, thousands of miles away, put real-time video into the decision makers, offices back in DC. It was to move past the point of delayed chips from satellite collection giving imagery analysts, to giving decision makers real-time video and asking analysts, do you want to see this from the left side, from the right side? What type of perspective? How long do you want to stay? I mean, those were at the time kind of mind-blowing. Especially when we were using analysts that had never worked with full motion video. So full motion video, FMV, is a common thing now. Wasn't at the time. But programmatically, our biggest success was, we found bin Laden. Mission 8, we found him at a specific point in time and watched him. And that was the mission. That was the requirement that we were given. And it was a culmination of 7-8 months worth of effort at that point. We were inside our timeline, put eyes on him. And it was through, at the time, it wasn't just that video coming off a Predator. It was the fact that we had human tipper information saying bin Laden's probably in the Kandahar area. And we had an analyst say, hey, it's Friday in Afghanistan. Let's pay attention to prayer times. Let's pay attention to, where would he go for a Friday prayer? Where would he be staying? And we had enough data at that point to be able to narrow that down to just a couple of places. And then getting that platform over Kandahar and seeing what we call the man in white from the video walk out of what was really believed to be his residence, meet with people, paying deference to him and basically a closed off street area, just before prayer time. That was success. It was followed by some failures in not being able to close that loop at that point. And that was in 2000. This was September of 2000, a full year before 9/11. So, to the point, those successes kind of built on each other. But at that point, if we were flying a mission every couple of days and just monumental effort to get the politics, the weather, the platform to all come together, those are things that are really taken for granted today. I'll pass it off to Mark for the other side of that.
Yeah.
Well, that's the early piece. And so if you look from June of 2000 to kind of March of 2002, you add in, just on top of what Alex said, you can also add, then we weaponized it. We brought in some changes to the weapon. We brought signals intelligence onto the platform. We brought the rover feed, which allowed us to push our video to other aircraft or to tactical units on the ground. We developed tools to give us situational awareness so that we could survive in that threat environment. We brought the entire operation back to the U.S., lengthened that key. And so when you look at all, and there's more, I could go on to more, all those capabilities that are taken for granted right now, we did from June of 2000 pretty much to March of 2002. And I don't think we ever, because we were so into the moment, I don't think either one of us added that all up until we started drafting notes for this and went, wow, this team did a lot of stuff.
We're pausing our conversation with authors Alec Bierbauer and Colonel Mark Cooter to personally invite you to join myself and former Deputy Director of the NSA, Rick Leggett, as we co-host the Cipher Brief Cybersecurity Summit, March 23rd through the 25th. Microsoft President Brad Smith will be there in conversation with former PDD&I Susan Gordon. FireEye CEO Kevin Mandia, who led the investigation that exposed the SolarWinds hack to the world, will be there in conversation with General David Petraeus. We'll hear from the acting director of CISA, Brandon Wales, and NSA's Dave Luber, as well as dozens of other cyber experts. Tickets are free. You can find the link to register in the Cipher Brief's free morning newsletter, or just Google the Cipher Brief and Cybersecurity Summit. Now back to our conversation with Alec Bierbauer and Colonel Mark Cooter.
So we've covered a lot of territory already. It's interesting if you think about the contributions that the drone system has made to the way we look at warfare now. it's exciting, some of the technology that's the military's figuring out ways to use in other ways. I wonder, can you guys talk a little bit about where you see this technology leading us in the future?
Go for it.
So from my perspective, and just to kind of start that out with the end of the last question, we had no vision for where this. I had no vision for where this was going. We had a singular target and focus area, but it's been amazing to watch. Now from the cheap seats, watching the progression of the technology over time. And how it's being used to really protect U.S. forces and to avoid exposing people to dangers where those can be avoided. And I think that's really where the capability is going to continue to be leveraged into the future. Collecting intelligence by human means on the ground, which is bread and butter for us at CIA. It's hard, it's time consuming, and it's going to continue to be an important piece. But source vetting is something that these technology systems help with, to be able to get that second set of eyes on something and say, what our human sources are telling us is being validated by what we're seeing, in some cases in real-time imagery, and in some cases delayed. So I think, there's how we integrate drone technology, be it the signals intelligence, the imagery intelligence, some of the other sensor capabilities. It creates that all source, confirming or disconfirming data set as that gets put together by the intelligence community. But I also think, we touched briefly on the artificial intelligence and the machine learning aspects of where things are evolving. And I think it's important that, if we can get, the human further out of that intelligence collection loop, have more autonomous vehicles, have sensors that are better at collecting and processing, moving less volumes of data, because as you're collecting, just vast amounts of data, you're also tying up communication systems to be able to move that. In some cases, you'll be able to do more on the aircraft. In some cases, you'll be able to automate, target recognition or object recognition. This is a boat, this is not a boat. This is a soldier with a weapon. This is a civilian with a broomstick. Those types of things, across the spectrum of drone collection. Those were things that we would have loved to have had 20 years ago, when we were squinting at grainy images, trying to figure things out. So I think the AI aspect, I think the machine learning and how those get applied to technology are going to be great. But like I said, the human in the loop is really got to be there, and we got to recognize that there's a huge responsibility that comes with operating systems like this, be it as an intelligence collection platform, as a mapping tool, as an agricultural survey tool, whatever it may be. Those have all evolved with the drone technology, and not just look at it as a weapon system.
And Mark, what about you? How do you sort of take lessons learned from being a part of really the development of this program, looking forward into how technology is impacting the future mission of the military, in this case, for national security?
Well, I think from a military perspective, the kind of the next challenge, we had kind of the luxury of being able to stay 3 to 5 miles away from the target at 20-some thousand feet and over there for hours. A near peer is not going to probably allow you to do that. So how do I get the sensors where Alec needs them for the time he needs to vet the targets, et cetera, and still survive whatever the environment is there? So that was the challenge, and continues to be. How are we going to do that in the next platforms or system of systems to be able to do that? I think is on top of what Alec was talking about.
Suzanne and I were at an event years ago, and a senior military leader who shall remain nameless said something, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, when we see sparks of innovation in the military, we deploy battalions of firefighters to put it out. And that was kind of the sense of what he said. You guys were involved in taking something from an idea, as you mentioned, all the way through to successful, completion of this project with some really important results. What do you say to people who are in the military now that are young, that are starting out, that hear all of the reports about how fast the military needs to move and how innovation is going to be critical for us to maintain pace with our peers, are still feeling that resistance, that internal bureaucracy that we know exists in the military and other parts of the government? What do you say to them, and how they navigate what can be really risky endeavors for careers, not the results of which notwithstanding? I mean, how should they be thinking about innovation?
Mark, that's yours as the career military guy. All I'm going to say is we didn't know it was hard at the time.
We were too young and naive, I think. I look back on it was persistence from our perspective. It was always, how do we get to yes? And we were surrounded by the same thing. Everybody on our team was, how do we get to yes? And I think we had a luxury of key leaders in specific places that allowed us enough rope, but not enough rope to hang ourselves. Yeah. So there were from Charlie Allen at the agency and General Campbell there, my immediate boss, Colonel Ed Boyle, Snake Clark, as I mentioned, Bill Grimes, who ran Big Safari, who did all the acquisition piece and build this, and some of the senior leaders all the way up to the chiefs of staff at the time. While there may have been people between us and them that didn't get it, they got it, and they allowed us to press ahead. Alec?
The only thing I'd add to that is, the leadership, for me on the agency side, similarly gave us rope, but, it was when we handpicked our team, we found people that we were very comfortable with, that were experts in their specific little piece of this puzzle. And, all we did was really glue it together. But, if you look at, how do you replicate this? How do you institutionalize that innovation? It's groups like Big Safari that does it on the Air Force side. It's OSD, Office of Secretary of Defense, is now JCTDs, Joint Concept Technology Demonstrations, places where that innovation is taking place and experimentation, where it's okay to fail, as long as you're documenting those failures, learning from those failures. People are often a little afraid of, what is this going to do to my career when I fail at this? And yes, if you're running a program of record, if you're running a major, weapon system or any system within government that's institutionalized, it's already been through that innovation cycle and that experimentation cycle. Being able to participate in that innovation and experimentation cycle is fantastic. Things worked out for us, but not all the time. We had failures. Short aside, the first time we launched an aircraft to go into Afghanistan, we crashed. Or as the Air Force would say, we had a hard landing. But it was not repairable and it never flew again. Major failure. But we survived it. I think the way I briefed it to my boss was good news, bad news. Bad news is we crashed. The good news is the pilot's okay. And we were allowed, although we had serious discussions about it, we were allowed to continue. We had one more aircraft and we were allowed to experiment with that one. So that top cover was there. There was significant negotiation about who was going to pay for the broken one. But yeah, it's all about finding good leaders and then as leaders, empowering those young soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, or intelligence officers to experiment, giving them enough rope to be creative, to innovate.
Just, innovation relies on failure. And I'd love to just see that permeate more through US society everywhere, whether it's, military intelligence communities, Silicon Valley, private sector understands that need for failure, I think sometimes a little bit better. But it would be great if everyone sort of adapted that attitude. I'd like to nerd out for just a couple seconds before we wrap up with you guys here on the process of writing a book. I mean, how did you both know that you had a book to write, and what was the process like of kind of getting the approvals that were necessary, and going through all the stages that you need to do? It's not easy. A lot of people, particularly who come from the places where you both come from, the Pentagon and the intelligence community, and back to the Pentagon, would love to write a book, but they don't know A, if they have one, and B, where to even start. What was it like for you?
We didn't know we had a book, and I'm pretty sure if it was just Mark and I left to our own devices, we still wouldn't have a book. We had a third, Michael Marks, great American, great friend, who took our rambling notes that were probably destined for, at best, a dry academic textbook approach, and turned it into the narrative that you've read. He interviewed us, he extracted details from us, he spent time with a number of members of the team. And then we were faced with that ultimate burden that we had signed a form long ago saying anything we write has got to be cleared for public release. On the agency side, it was incredibly difficult, and probably harder than building the program itself. We submitted it to the Publication Review Board. The initial response was, the very premise of this book is properly classified, and you're not going to publish this book. They printed out chapter 4 in our one and only meeting, and burned out a printer to do it, I'm sure. Everything in chapter 4 was redacted with the exception of the title, and the title was, at that point, now we've got very creative, quirky titles. At that point, it was chapter 4. And that was the only thing that was unclassified in the book. But we wound up getting an attorney to advise us on this, and we were hoping to get a little bit more attention out of the Publication Review Board process. Kevin Carroll from Wigan and Dana, and another former CO and military JAG. And he helped champion the cause. Really, all we wanted was get proper attention to this. Tell us what needs to come out, or what needs to be adjusted, so that we could get a viable product out onto the streets for people to learn. Really, the purpose was innovation. We wanted to highlight the innovation. We wanted to highlight the team. We wanted to highlight the people that we were able to pull together. I think Mark and I were largely orchestrating and dealing with our higher ups, but we had phenomenal engineers. We had phenomenal pilots, sensor operators, technicians, comms, some very colorful characters that I hope comes out in the book.
Mark, what do you think? Would you do it again?
The mission, absolutely.
What about writing the book?
I don't know about that. It's interesting when I mentioned all the successes we had. I still have my notes from my when I departed the team, and it kind of started from there. And I built, Alec and I built an outline, and we joked about it for years. Maybe we got something here, but I wasn't going to do it until I retired from the Air Force, which was in 2013. And he was at my retirement, and it was kind of right then. Okay. Put up or shut up. And we had some stories, and like you said, Michael came in and took the bar napkin stories and turned them into vignettes into chapters. And the next thing we had a book. The challenge was getting it through. We had some help along the way, getting it through the bureaucracy. We had some of its timing to help through the Department of Defense. My officer training school classmate and Intel school classmate, now Congressman Don Bacon, helped us out with a letter. So I thank him for that. That got it started, but it still was a long process. And I think that we just weren't going to give up because of the team. There were some people on the team that had passed, and I had made a promise to his wife and his kids that we would get the story out. And so that's why we kept going. So.
And I think the lesson there is, if you want to get anything done in Washington, you first go look and find your friends and see who's going to help you, because you can't do anything alone. Gentlemen, what are you both, just in closing, and offer any closing thoughts too, feel free, but what are you both doing now? So you're both retired. You've kind of written the book, which everybody has on their bucket list. What are you up to these days?
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, so I work for a small consulting firm, Patch Plus Consulting, still doing intelligence related work. We do intelligence, space, and cyber, but I'm a dependent spouse. My wife is still active duty. She's the group commander at Goodfellow Air Force Base that does all the training for our intelligence firefighters and enlisted scientists, not just for the Air Force, but it's a joint service as well. So that's half my life.
I'd like to meet your wife. What about you, Alec?
I'm living in Huntsville, Alabama, which is not coincidentally where Hellfire was found when we were looking for a weapon system for Predator. Small consulting firm here, BlackRock Strategy LLC. We do international risk mitigation programs, and we have a small part to play in some of the follow-on programs that we just talked about, and some of the looking at the AI aspects of warfighting in the future.
Authors Alec Bierbauer and Colonel Mark Cooter, thank you for joining us for the State Secrets podcast. Their book is called Never Mind, We'll Do It Ourselves, the inside story of how a team of renegades broke the rules, shattered barriers, and launched a drone warfare revolution. There it is right there.
He's holding it up, but this is a podcast. It's all right.
Yeah.
We'd also like to thank everyone else for listening. If you're interested in more national security expert conversations like this one, be sure to sign up for the Cipher Brief's free daily newsletter at thecipherbrief.com. Be sure to like us and leave comments. And if you want to see that book cover, you can join us on our YouTube channel. We appreciate you being a part of the Cipher Brief community. Thanks, gentlemen. Great conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.